Okay, one of my goals for this project is to use all my own lumber from trees that are just around my property, which have been naturally downed or were down for some other reason. And this is some white fir or ponderosa pine or Jeffrey pine. I think it's Jeffrey pine. It's a slab that I had cut up from a dead tree with the chainsaw mill a couple years back. Now, the goal for this project is this abstract cabinet design shown here in Fusion 360. I will have the file available for a free download. Check the description for the link to go get it. I will also be making these drawers out of solid wood, also milled from my property. So I took that rough piece and I jointed one edge just to make it flat, and I'll show you why in just a second. The first thing I needed to do was surface the entire board, and so I took it over the CNC machine, and I could take that relatively flat edge and push it against the dogs on my table. I shimmed up the sides to make it have an equal gap on all the sides, and this way I would remove as little material as possible from the slab. I used my 3D printed cam clamps, and I'll put a link in the description if you haven't seen these, to securely tie it down. It only took me a minute or two in Vectric VCarve to make some toolpaths to flatten the entire slab. I flipped it over and did the other side to get it down to 1.5 inches. So let me talk about the cabinet design before I go into the next steps of machining the front. So I designed this shape in a free 3D program called Blender. I'll link to it in the description if you haven't heard of it. It is parametrically generated. I created this geometry node structure based on a Voronoi texture to make the whole pattern. And the cool thing about this is that I could just drag some sliders around and kind of change the whole texture in any way that I want, and then export it and import the file into Fusion 360 and machine it. So I decided not to use the cam clamps to hold it down when machining that shape because I was worried that the machine might hit them. I could have probably carefully placed the locations to avoid hitting them, but I thought it'd be just a little bit safer to use double-sided tape. So I used double-sided tape to stick it down on my table, and I used the dog holes to locate my origin. So for a lot of my CNC projects, I like to watch the machine and make sure nothing's going crazy when it starts. And my split dust shoe design makes it really easy to watch it, make sure it looks okay, and then toss on the other side while it's running and let it get good dust collection. Here's what it looked like after a roughing pass using a 3/8 of an inch downcut bit. Now I use the downcut bit because it avoids some chip out that I would get in a softwood like pine or fir, and I only did a depth of cut of about 100 thousandths of an inch for the roughing pass, and it took about an hour to do this entire process. The finishing pass was with a 1/4 inch ball nose, and I think it took about 3 hours for that operation. Unfortunately, I forgot to plug in the GoPro, so I don't have the full time lapse. So here I am removing it from the table. I did get some machining lines that I had to sand out. I just used my random orbital sander and hit it with 150, and then after that, 220, so it would be ready for finishing. So the overall shape was looking pretty good. Let's jump into making the drawers. So if you want to be a glutton for punishment, try making all your drawers and cabinetry out of rough sawn lumber. And that's what I did. The basic process is to start on the bandsaw, which is a lot safer to rip the boards than if I went and did it on a table saw, because a board like this is cupped a ton. Ripping it into smaller pieces would help me get the most amount of material out, because that way the cupping would be minimized. Now, most people would take their piece and face one side on the joiner, assuming they have a joiner that's wide enough, and in this case I'd had an 8-inch joiner which was wide enough. But as I was working on the stock, I realized it was just removing too much material because the pieces were just pretty heavily twisted. Now, I could remove less material by facing it in the CNC and shimming it just like I did at the start for that bigger slab. So I ended up doing this for a bunch of my pieces. Now, most people would think that this is pretty slow, but the actual process wasn't too bad. In particular, I could hit start on the CNC machine to begin machining one piece, and while that one's being machined, I would go over to a different offset and set up another piece to be ready to be machined once the first one was finished. I could then just go back and forth until I had all the pieces that I wanted done. Of course, there's no doubt that using a planer would be so much faster, and so I did that for the other side. I would try and run multiple pieces at the same time to avoid getting any snipe, and that worked pretty well. The typical woodworking dance at that point is to joint one side and then take it over to the bandsaw. I could then go ahead and rip it in half, and from a rough 6/4 stock, I could get 2 5/8 of an inch pieces as final stock ready for drawer sides. One of my other goals for this project was to use my new vertical work table and cut some dovetail joinery on the CNC machine. And for me, this is a learning process. I'm not sure I've kind of dialed in exactly how I want to do it. I'll share a parametric CAD file in Fusion 360 if you want to experiment with what I've done. And what I settled on was just having a support piece on both sides of the workpiece. And this just helped avoid any chip out or tear out. And the way I decided to do it for the quickest way was to just make my clamping piece be extended above, and I could machine into that. And that way, the exact same dovetails would be available on each piece again. I use Fusion 360 for my toolpath generation, and there are some tricks you have to do to make sure that everything cuts right without doing anything weird. And maybe in the future I'll share a video just on how to do dovetails once I get the process really dialed in. Overall, the dovetail fit was really tight, and I was pretty happy with how it turned out. I decided to use solid wood for the drawer bottoms simply because I had the wood, and I used some pine or fir again. I initially machined a bunch of it down to 3/16 of an inch thick and glued those up. In the end, I thought that was too thin, and I did again with doubling the thickness, 3/8 of an inch thick. The CNC machine is great for doing stopped dados or stopped grooves, meaning grooves that don't go all the way through the piece. And this really just allows you to put them wherever you want and easily machine them. I did a couple of test cuts to get the fit just right so they would slide in pretty easily, and then I just cut them all out on the CNC machine. I wasn't too happy with the way I did my glue up of my drawers, and when I do another set of dovetail drawers, I'm going to do it differently based on some just more traditional techniques. What I did worked and everything was pretty straight, but I just think there's a better way with less glue up. One thing to note, the solid wood is not glued in. The solid wood bottoms are not glued in. For the carcass of this cabinet, I used some more of the wood I had and milled it up in the same method as I did earlier, just milling it to 3/4 of an inch thick. I didn't really want to spend a lot of time in the joinery, so I busted out my good old biscuit joiner and just connected it with a bunch of biscuits. Okay, so back to that crazy Voronoi solid wood front. I had to cut it up to make it actually be drawer fronts, and so I just carefully measured everything and just decided to rip it across on the table saw, and then went ahead and cross cut it into exactly 4 pieces, which would be my drawer fronts. So at this point I had everything made, and I really didn't want to spend a lot of money, so I sprayed the cabinets with some finish I had laying around, and I just used some oil to oil the drawers, which isn't something I'd do if I was using this anywhere else except my shop. I decided to hide those pretty dovetails with some cheap Home Depot hardware. These are 16-inch long full extension drawer slides. I just wanted to try using them, and I'm going to never use them again. So for attaching the drawer fronts, I decided to use the trick of using the drawer pull to align them. So I just set everything up with a spacer and kind of taped them in place. I marked where I wanted my pulls to be located and then drilled a hole through at that location. From that point, I could pull the drawers out, attach the drawer pull on, and then kind of push it back and get it aligned again, and then sink some screws in from the backside to actually hold it on. Okay, so here's how the finished cabinet turned out. I'm pretty happy with the results. It was a great experimentation with a Voronoi pattern face. The cabinet was pretty fun to build, but took a long time going from rough stock lumber. But I didn't have to buy any lumber. I bought the drawer slides and the pulls, and that was pretty much it. And here it is in its final resting location under the back of my CNC table, where it'll store bits and other miscellaneous stuff. As usual, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys soon. You can download a lot of these files from my website for free. I'll post a link to them. Have a good day. Bye.